The Kremlin has downplayed the idea of an imminent summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Despite U.S. President Donald Trump urging direct talks, Moscow remains non-committal. Trump initially suggested a three-way summit, but now believes it may be better for Putin and Zelensky to meet first. Putin is open to talks, but Russia's foreign minister has emphasized a gradual approach, which many see as a stalling tactic. Trump's stance on the war in Ukraine has evolved. While he once promised to quickly broker a ceasefire, he now calls for a direct peace deal. He has also proposed that the U.S. provide air support if European countries send ground troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire. European leaders, however, are skeptical, and many fear Putin may not be serious about peace. Zelensky and European leaders are pushing for firm security guarantees before any peace deal, as they fear a ceasefire without such guarantees would leave Ukraine vulnerable. Despite Putin's dismissive stance towards Zelensky, both sides remain open to talks, though serious challenges remain. Trump's commitment to the issue remains uncertain, and European leaders continue to question whether a resolution is within reach. Donald Trump's efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war face growing pressure as obstacles to progress persist. Last week's summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska was full of ceremony but yielded little in terms of concrete diplomatic achievements. On Monday, 6 European leaders met with Trump in Washington to assess the results, but the gathering also failed to bring tangible progress. Despite this, 2 potential developments emerged. Trump signaled openness to providing U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine, which would be critical for a peace deal. However, he clarified on Tuesday that any U.S. commitment might involve air support rather than deploying troops on the ground, leaving Europe to carry most of the burden. Trump also mentioned the possibility of a bilateral summit between Putin and Zelensky, though the details remain uncertain. European leaders want a ceasefire before any talks, but Trump has expressed doubts about its likelihood. Nevertheless, the mere fact that direct negotiations are being considered is seen as a step forward. While the talks were cordial, challenges remain. The biggest one is whether Putin actually wants the war to end as he continues to make progress on the battlefield. Trump, however, seems convinced that Putin is interested in a deal despite the prolonged conflict. Trump's position on the matter remains fluid, and his political base may not support further foreign commitments, especially as the war continues. His fluctuating views on Zelensky, from critical to supportive, show the unpredictable nature of U.S. foreign policy under his leadership. Ultimately, while Trump seeks to cement his legacy as a peacemaker, his position remains tenuous. Europe, Russia, and Ukraine have far more at stake, and Trump could ultimately walk away from negotiations, a move that would leave him with the option of distancing himself from a potentially unpopular foreign commitment. U.S. military veterans are stepping in to help Afghan refugees fight deportation as they seek political asylum in the United States. Abdul, a former journalist in Afghanistan who was tortured by the Taliban after the U.S. withdrawal in 2021, is one such refugee. He now lives in California, applying for asylum and facing the looming threat of being deported back to Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. At his recent court hearing in San Diego, Abdul was not alone. He was supported by 10 veterans from the Battle Buddies group, founded by U.S. Navy veteran Sean Van Diver. The group now boasts over 900 volunteer veterans across the country. The Battle Buddies aim to protect Afghan allies who risk deportation after the Trump administration ended crucial programs that shielded them. These veterans argue that abandoning those who helped the U.S. military during the war would hurt American credibility and national security, as it could deter future allies from assisting U.S. forces in conflict zones. While the Trump administration has severely limited protection for Afghan refugees, leaving them vulnerable to deportation, many veterans continue to advocate for the restoration of temporary protected status for Afghans, especially those who work directly with U.S. forces. Abdul's case, where the presence of veterans at his hearing helped ensure he was not detained, highlights the growing support for Afghan refugees and the role veterans are playing in their defense. The U.S. has signed deportation agreements with Uganda and Honduras as part of a broader effort to combat illegal immigration. Uganda has agreed to accept African and Asian migrants who sought asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, while Honduras will take in several hundred migrants, mainly from Spanish-speaking countries. These deals are part of the Trump administration's push to get more countries to accept deported migrants who are not their own citizens. Critics have condemned the agreements, expressing concern that deported individuals could face harm in these countries. While Uganda will only accept migrants with clean criminal records, it is unclear how many will be accepted. Honduras has agreed to accept migrants, including families with children, over the next 2 years, but could accept more depending on future circumstances. The agreements are part of a broader push by the Trump administration, which has worked with several countries with controversial human rights records to secure deportation arrangements. Recently, Rwanda, Panama, and Costa Rica have agreed to take in deported migrants. Human rights experts warn that sending migrants to countries where they may face harm could violate international law, particularly the principle of non-refoulement, which prohibits deporting people to places where they face danger. President Donald Trump has announced plans to attempt to eliminate mail-in voting ahead of the 2026 elections for the House of Representatives and Senate. Trump recently stated that an executive order was being drafted to end mail-in ballots, which he claims are corrupt, and expressed concerns about their use in helping Democrats win elections. Despite benefiting from mail-in ballots in his 2024 victory, Trump has long claimed without evidence that mail-in voting contributed to his loss in 2020 due to voter fraud. Mail-in voting allows voters to cast ballots from home and send them in for counting, which became more widespread during the COVID-19 pandemic. 8 states and Washington, D.C. hold elections entirely by mail, while other states allow voters to request absentee ballots. In 2020, 43% of votes were cast by mail compared to 30% in 2024. Trump's concerns about mail-in voting are rooted in his belief that it is prone to fraud and favors Democrats, although no evidence has substantiated these claims. Interestingly, in the 2024 election, several states that Trump won saw Republicans embrace mail-in voting as well, sometimes outpacing Democrats. However, Trump does not have the legal authority to change voting laws. The U.S. Constitution assigns the power to regulate elections to the states, not the president. While Congress can modify federal election laws, it cannot dictate how states conduct their own elections. Trump's assertion that states must follow federal government directives on voting was described by experts as incorrect and dangerous. Trump's claim that the U.S. is the only country with mail-in voting was also inaccurate. Many countries, including Canada, Germany, and South Korea, allow some form of mail-in voting, with 12 countries allowing all voters to vote by mail. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, has announced that the southern border wall will be painted black to deter people from attempting to climb it during hot weather. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem stated that the idea was suggested by President Donald Trump. She explained that painting the wall black would make it even hotter, adding to the difficulty of scaling it in the intense heat. The black paint will not only discourage climbing, but will also prevent rust from forming on the steel, according to U.S. Border Patrol Chief Michael Banks. This move comes as the Trump administration reports a decrease in apprehensions at the southern border, with 6,000 apprehensions in June, 15% lower than the previous record in March. The southern border wall was a significant part of Trump's immigration policy during his first term, and in his second term, the focus has shifted to deportations and domestic enforcement. The painting is part of broader efforts under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which secured $46.5 billion for modernizing the border barrier, including 700 miles of completed construction. Noem mentioned that the government is building approximately half a mile of wall per day, and that the wall's design would vary depending on the area's geography. Additionally, Noem highlighted the department's use of waterborne infrastructure and advanced technology, such as cameras and sensors, to enhance border security. President Donald Trump has made bold claims about ending multiple wars during his second term, asserting that he has ended 6 or even 7 wars across various regions, including the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. In a recent meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders, Trump stated, "I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars," highlighting places like India, Pakistan, and conflicts in Africa. The White House has reinforced this message, declaring Trump as the president of peace and listing 7 claimed agreements that include peace deals between countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan, Cambodia and Thailand, and Israel and Iran, along with the Abraham Accords, a normalization pact between Israel and several Arab states signed during Trump's first term. The president also recently stated, "We ended 7 wars" during an appearance on Fox and Friends. However, some of these claims are arguably inflated, a typical feature of Trump's rhetoric. While his administration has indeed brokered agreements and worked to de-escalate certain conflicts, Trump's actions often raise questions about whether these efforts lead to long-term peace or simply serve as short-term wins for political optics, similar to his business branding tactics. While Trump has managed to stop some conflicts from escalating into full-scale wars, his approach has been criticized for undermining traditional diplomatic tools, particularly through his administration's cuts to the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and the State Department. These moves may limit the U.S.'s ability to transform diplomatic breakthroughs into lasting peace agreements that address the root causes of conflicts. Trump's actions in foreign policy prompt a broader question. Is he genuinely seeking sustainable peace, or is he more focused on short-term victories that enhance his image, particularly as part of his campaign for a Nobel Peace Prize? Joseph Humire, the current Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere Affairs, has been linked to the promotion of misinformation while serving as the executive director of the Center for a Secure Free Society, a think tank. Under his leadership, the center published a Tren de Aragua activity monitor that tracked alleged crimes by the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua across the United States. However, a report from Insight Crime found multiple fabricated entries in the tracker, including an article about a robbery by a gang member that was entirely made up. Despite these false entries, the think tank did not offer a full explanation for the errors, although its executive director stated they would work to address the issue. The think tank removed only one of the false entries, and no response was provided when media outlets inquired about Humire's involvement or the organization's role in spreading misinformation. The situation raises concerns, as the Trump administration seems to have appointed someone with a history of overseeing misinformation at a time when trust in the U.S. Defense Department is critical. This could potentially undermine the credibility of the Pentagon, especially in a role that involves national security in the Western Hemisphere. Congressman Wesley Hunt, R. Texas, has sharply criticized Democrats and the media for their opposition to President Trump's decision to deploy the National Guard in Washington, D.C. to combat the city's rising crime. Hunt, who revealed that his own apartment complex in the Navy Yard area was broken into last year, pointed out that even a front desk attendant was robbed of her belongings just floors away from his unit. Hunt expressed his frustration with critics, saying, "I don't understand what these critics are talking about. It's not safe." He referenced his own experience, highlighting that a robbery occurred only blocks away from the Capitol, which is where many lawmakers work. Hunt also noted that just across the street from his complex, another representative, Henry Cuellar, had been robbed at gunpoint. The deployment of the National Guard to address crime in D.C. has been controversial, especially among Democrats. House Judiciary Ranking Member Jamie Raskin, DMD, introduced a resolution to prevent the president from keeping service members in the district. However, Trump invoked the District of Columbia Home Rule Act, which allows him to declare a public emergency and send federal resources to D.C. Trump's goal, according to him, is to restore the city to its former state as the most beautiful capital in the world by tackling the crime, homelessness, and filth. Hunt also pointed out the double standards, citing Democratic governors like Tim Walz and Gavin Newsom, who used their National Guard forces for other issues like COVID-19 restrictions or cleaning up for high-profile visits, but didn't address everyday crime issues. The White House has reported positive results from the National Guard's presence, with 465 arrests made, including the capture of an MS-13 gang member. Local residents, including Capitol Hill staffer James Laverty, have also noticed an improvement in safety, particularly in areas like Navy Yard and U Street, which now feel much safer compared to the previous week. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican nominee for New York City mayor, is focused on defeating Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani in the upcoming general election. Sliwa, a longtime political figure and founder of the Guardian Angels, believes that Mamdani's candidacy could be a threat to the city's future, claiming that other Democratic candidates like Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo share similar views to Mamdani and are Zohran-light. Sliwa, who is the only Republican running in the race, emphasized his strong Republican values and stated that he will not be dropping out of the race, despite polling showing Mamdani with a double-digit lead. In the face of competition, he also called for Trump to stay neutral and not intervene in the mayoral race, despite the former president's historical ties to New York politics. Sliwa has been active in New York City for decades, known for his crime prevention efforts with the Guardian Angels. He has made a second attempt to run for mayor, positioning himself as an alternative to the far-left policies associated with Mamdani and his Democratic rivals. Sliwa has also commented on global issues, specifically urging Trump to focus on bringing peace between Israel and Hamas, which he believes would benefit his campaign.